Climate change is caused by changes in the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This has always been in flux and our weather has always changed. The problem today is man-made greenhouse gas emissions. Modern industrialization has been based on the large-scale conversion of natural assets such as forests and oil fields. These are carbon sinks, and when they get converted, the carbon stored in them is released into the atmosphere. The impact of this is a global weather system that is increasingly unstable and extreme. If we're going to prevent the worst, we have to stop converting these natural assets. Weaning ourselves off oil and gas and switching to renewable energy is one priority. Managing natural assets such as soils and forests better is another. Living Carbon International specialises in the latter. We're a positive impact solution provider with a specialist interest and focus on the protection and sustainable management of natural carbon sinks around the world, principally soils and forests. Historically, the environment has been seen from an industrial and economic perspective as a free good. Of course, society ends up paying in the end. Using the atmosphere as a repository for industrial emissions can eventually lead to an increase in the costs of providing healthcare, which are invariably picked up by the taxpayer. Using the oceans as a repository for plastic waste can eventually lead to an increase in the costs of conserving marine biodiversity, which are invariably picked up by charity donations. The recent emergence of markets for ecosystem services, such as the carbon markets, signals the beginning of a move away from an economic model that treats the environment as an external cost to one where the costs of environmental services on which they depend are built into the bottom line. A carbon offset is effectively a license to emit an amount of greenhouse gases equivalent to 1 tonne of carbon dioxide. Each carbon offset is produced by either removing the equivalent of 1 tonne of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, for example by planting trees, or avoiding the release of 1 tonne of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, for example by arresting deforestation. By purchasing carbon offsets and retiring them against the emissions it generates from industrial activity within its sphere of responsibility, a country or corporation reduces its net climate impact on a polluter pays basis. In addition, the purchase of a carbon offset adds to the cost of doing business, which creates an incentive to switch to less impactful and therefore cheaper models of operation. There are many methodologies for creating carbon offsets, but just 2 types of market. A compliance market that operates under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is essentially policy-based, and a voluntary market that operates under a suite of non-governmental carbon standards, which is essentially market-based. In many ways, carbon credits are, in effect, a new asset class. The principal innovation of carbon credits is the mobilisation of private capital in support of environmental protection and social development, sectors traditionally dependent on charity donations, government grants, and more recently, corporate social responsibility budgets. Yet private investor appetite in the carbon space is being dampened by a number of teething problems that are typical of nascent markets when rules and tools are still in development. Lack of transparency and price volatility is one. Lack of consensus on standards in monitoring, reporting, and verification is another. Lack of capacity within the system is a third. A huge amount of effort is going into addressing these shortfalls. For example, the work of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market and their core carbon principles, and Oxford University's offsetting principles. A lot of work is also being done in the technology space to address transparency and traceability issues. So, lots to be positive about for the role of environmental markets in the future.